Welcome to the Wheel of Time Diaries. I'm your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and we are on the final stretch. This is the first of projected to be 5 diaries for A Memory of Light, the final book of the series. We're on episode 70 at this point, an absolute, honestly crazy number. Especially when you consider the amount of time that it has taken to get to this point. It's been just about 3 years. I read The Eye of the World in May of 2023 and started off the diaries with that book, of course. And now, basically 3 years later, in May 2026, I will be finished with this book. But of course, it's not quite May yet. It's instead the very beginning of April. That means that we actually have the book to read and to get through, and I have started reading it and gotten through a little over a fifth of it. I'm about 22% of the way through, read about 195 pages or something out of 895. I've read the prologue and the first 8 chapters. It's this much of the book, and that is how much we are going to cover in today's diary. Really looking forward to this. Just looking forward to being done with the journey, but also because I'm a major climax and resolution person when it comes to reading. A really good climax can make up for a mediocre book otherwise, and a not good climax can ruin what is otherwise a decent book for me, or even a really good book can be ruined by a really bad climax and resolution. And so this entire book seems like it's basically just entirely the climax of the series, not just of this final arc of the series, not just of this final trilogy, but of the series at large, which of course makes sense. That is what it is basically doing. That is what it is intended to do. So how do I feel about that so far? Well, I did spend a little over 6.5 hours reading over the last handful of days getting through this. It was actually over the course of 3 days that I was able to get through that reading, and really enjoyed myself, actually really having a good time with it so far. And in the way that it is, the beginning of the end, the climax, or rather everything just finally getting started in such a way that the end of Towers of Midnight definitely effectively promised, it has been very satisfying so far. For spoiler-free impressions, I just want to say that this book has started off basically right in the thick of it. There's a lot of consolidation that happened in Towers of Midnight, and the way that that consolidation allows for things to feel like they're just continuing on in a straightforward way right from the get-go here, compared to some of the other recent books, where you have 1.5 million different plot lines going on. This feels like it's a little bit more focused, technically speaking. I think there are a couple minor issues I have with certain scenes where it's basically directly stated that some characters are going to go do a thing, but then the next scene does something, and then those previous characters will return again after that, and they did not do the thing that they were going to go do. They were instead doing a different thing, and so there's a little bit of very slight continuity inconsistencies within, the way that scenes are broken. I would say the jumping between POVs, and especially jumping between several POVs every single chapter, is a little bit much. I'm not entirely sure that that decision is 100% necessary up to this point in the book so far, but as far as what's actually here, I am really enjoying it. You have basically the lead up to the final battle happening, of course, and although the final battle doesn't actually occur until this point, or rather that's the chapter titled The Last Battle, is this entire portion right here between these two bookmarks. It's just that one chapter. There's still quite a bit of ways to go before that, but all of these first 200 pages of the book, if I were to guess, I think take place over the course of 12 or 16 hours or something like that. So it's obviously very consolidated. Basically all the POVs are together in one location. All the major characters are together in one location for the most part. There are a couple of exceptions. There is going to be a little bit more splitting in the immediate future, which of course we'll get into a little bit as we talk about the plot a little bit more. But as far as my general first impressions of the book, it is really, really good. Being a climax person, the fact that this book starts off already feeling like that, right off the bat, following, the way that Towers of Midnight ends, it's it's fulfilling that promise so far. Now, of course, I have only read those just about 200 pages out of 900 pages, so I still have a long ways to go, but I'm really into it so far. As for the structure of this video, as we're preparing to jump into spoiler talk, the structure of this is going to be a little bit different. It's not going to be quite so haphazard the way that Towers of Midnight surely felt most of the time because of all of the, various different plot lines and the way how they're nothing ever happens in back-to-back sequence. Sort of the similar thing is happening here, but because all the major POVs are consolidated and together, a lot of stuff is technically happening like in back-to-back sequence together here, despite the shifting of POVs so frequently. So at least for this first week's diary, there's not a whole ton of splitting hairs that I need to do with regards to the storylines that we're following, in what order. There's a little bit of it. I have a particular order that I want to cover stuff, but there's also a little bit of a disclaimer here that I want to cover A Memory of Light a little bit differently than I have the last couple books. I admit I've gotten a little bit exhausted by just how long these videos get on account of just basically doing play-by-play plot recap stuff. That was never really the intent of what these videos were supposed to be. And so I don't know that I necessarily want to do that so much. I tried to back off on that in Towers of Midnight a bit more, and it didn't really work. So I'm honestly going to try to see if I can, back off on that a little bit, comparatively speaking, in A Memory of Light, and talk more about impressions with some of the major events going on. I definitely did not do anywhere near as detailed summaries of the chapter by chapters, basically just the bigger moments of what's happening all at once. So that's how we're going to try to cover what's happening in this week's reading. I'm not 100% sure how it's going to go, but as for the structure, we're going to cover a few of the miscellaneous POVs that occur in the prologue. Then we're going to cover the Camelin portion of the prologue, because there's a lot of POVs that happen. There's miscellaneous, Talmanes, and Camelin, miscellaneous, Talmanes, and Camelin, and it just goes back and forth like, a dozen times or something through the course of the prologue. So we'll cover all the miscellaneous stuff, then we'll do Camelin. Then we'll centralize at the Fields of Merrilor and talk a lot about the main plot that's going on there. We'll briefly jump to the Black Tower and what's going on there in the beginning of the book, and then we'll come back and wrap up with, other stuff happening in the Fields of Merrilor with some negotiations and whatnot that are going on. So the structure ought to make sense as we go through it, but let's just give this a shot and actually get into the spoiler talk and just, kind of stuff that are going on. Starting off with the prologue, like I said, the prologue of A Memory of Light is really good. I think it is arguably my favorite prologue of the series, actually. It might not be my very favorite one. I'm not 100% sure. I don't remember most of them well enough to know, but I do think it is the first one that manages to be like multiple hours long that fully justifies that runtime, compared to, say, something like Crossroads of Twilight and Knife of Dreams, where those prologues are like 4 hours long. They don't need to be 4 hours long. A Memory of Light's prologue is like 2.5 hours long, at least in my reading speed. And it actually justified all of that. Most of the time, these prologues don't need to be anywhere near as long as they have been, from Lord of Chaos onwards. So the fact that this one actually justifies all of its runtime is really good. And that is because of the way that it structures itself, largely speaking. It is very satisfying. As I kind of said before, there's multiple miscellaneous POVs that occur, but they're also broken up in between each one with a central character. Sorry, I bumped the mic. A central character and plotline, Camelin, that is happening. The invasion of Camelin, of the Trollocs, that is discovered right at the very end of Towers of Midnight, something that was very much promised at the very end of the last book and is being satisfied immediately in this one as part of the prologue. I thought that decision, very good, and to have those scenes breaking up in between all of the other miscellaneous stuff, really satisfying structure. I was super into that. So with regard to some of the miscellaneous POVs, we do have an opening scene that occurs featuring Jared Sarand, some other noble person from Camelin who I vaguely recall being a character at some other point in the series, but not anybody that I remember. But there is this character, Jared Sarand. He has his other people with him, some other men. They've been attacked might not necessarily be the right term, but there's been a bubble of evil within their camp, a symptom of the last battle that Jared Sarand believes is actually because of Elaine and her Aes Sedai, so he's obviously in pretty heavy opposition to Elaine holding the crown of Andor, and he's also doesn't believe that the last battle is imminent, but all of his other men do believe that the last battle is imminent, so they decide to desert him. That is the opening scene of the book, and it is kind of in that same vein as like the very opening scene of the last couple of books, these Brandon Sanderson books, things that are like very much putting in your face some obvious symptom of the last battle and the way that certain people within the world are handling it. Now, I'm not sure if any of these characters are going to pop back around the way that, the characters in the first scene of the previous couple prologues didn't ever come back around and don't ultimately matter in the grand scheme of things, rather than just, compared to them actually just giving an idea of kind of things that are going on in a part of the world. I anticipate that there will probably be like the main character of that particular scene, the opening scene of this prologue will I would assume that he might return because of the way that Jared Sarand's men are, their intent upon partaking in the last battle. They're not going to be denied that. That's part of why they decide to desert this guy, instead go to Andor, to Caemlyn, basically, to try to do something about it. So that was an interesting moment. So I do anticipate that this will actually come into fruition a little bit in this book compared to previous opening scenes and prologues. But that was interesting. I did enjoy that scene. It was an effective opener. Not quite as good as like the Gathering Storm one, for example, but still a good opener. Some of the other miscellaneous scenes that do occur in this prologue include POV from Slayer, which was really interesting. Slayer as both Isam and Luke, the dual personality of them, which was, prior to Towers of Midnight and Perrin having the confrontation with this character in the Wolf Dream. I'd like kind of, I had admittedly completely forgotten about the connection between Isam and Luke. I'd forgotten that those names were even names in the series, and so getting to experience that in this prologue was also pretty nice. You see him in the Blight. There are some Forsaken characters that he interacts with here. He watches Moradin pass by in the streets. He seems to be pretty nervous about some stuff going on. He also has an interaction with Sindain, or you can pretty heavily assume that it is Sindain / previously known as Lanfear, coming up to him and giving him a task, a command to target and kill Rand. So now we know that Slayer is kind of still out and about, and that he is going to, be targeting Rand specifically. He wants to target Perrin. He has some, concerns about his task. He doesn't really want to do the job because he doesn't trust Sindain and he doesn't trust the people who have been tasked to do this with him. But he's going to do that, so that's something that happens. And another good miscellaneous scene from the prologue is one from another Forsaken. That is Moghedien, where she steps into a dream shard, Moradin's dream shard, and is also brought in with some of the other Forsaken. We encounter Graendal in there, who has now been revived in the form of an ugly hag, basically, compared to her previously beautiful self. We get Mazrim Taim as introduced, being now a chosen or Forsaken in the scene, and also Moghedien being told by Moradin to assist Demandred wherever he is doing whatever he's doing, whoever he is. That is going to be something that I think is going to be like a relatively major, question mark throughout the course of this book, is like, who is Demandred actually? And that is a major point that I do want to talk about with regard to this prologue. I like the way that Sanderson brought Mazrim Taim back into the plot in an important way, because it is pretty obvious at this point that Taim and Demandred were the same person back in like Lord of Chaos, for example. But Robert Jordan was petty and stupid and decided that because fans figured this out too quickly, he retconned himself and Taim was no longer Demandred, and so he had no idea what to do with the Black Tower anymore at that point, and also had no idea who Demandred was at that point, and basically has done nothing with him at all. So we don't know who Demandred is anymore. There's been nothing that's really hinted at that, in my view, or nothing that is in any way obvious the way that like Taim and Demandred's connection was, because that's who he used to be. retcons are stupid. Basically never do them unless there's literally no other option. In this case, there were other options, and that was to not do that. But anyway, that was a problem that I had. I do appreciate Brandon Sanderson bringing Taim into the Forsaken fold in this way, because it actually, like, it felt impactful. I liked the way that Taim was brought into here and announced by Moradin for the other Forsaken, and also Moradin confirming, like, it is just the 4 of us, but the 4 of us aren't enough. Here's another one. Taim here is now one of us now. So have fun with that. So that's pretty cool, even though it does pretty well, sadly, exacerbate the issue with us not knowing who Demandred is, because I do think things would be better if Demandred was just Taim this entire time. But in any case, that is something that also happens in the prologue, and I liked that. I liked that a lot. Like I said, I liked Taim being brought into the fold, even though it, accentuates the pain of previous problems being retconned. So yeah, there's that. Otherwise, the rest of the prologue does focus, like I said, on Talmanes and the invasion of Caemlyn from the Trollocs, because at the end of Towers of Midnight, we learned from a letter from Viren addressed to Mat that the Dark Forces were planning to invade Caemlyn through the Waygate, that they had a way to get through the Waygate, despite what was previously assumed to be it being safe and not needing to be watched. Well, it needed to be watched, so Caemlyn was invaded, and Talmanes and the Red Band go to Caemlyn in the prologue and are able to gain control over the south gate of the city so that they can actually deal with the problem, right? They're not able to deal with the problem super head on. Their main goal is that the Shadow can't get access to the dragons, to Aludra and her work, so we need to go and get those, and if we can get them out of the city, cool. If we can't, we need to destroy them. So that is what their scenes, when you're flashing back and forth between them, are largely doing. They do manage to get to the traveling ground near where the palace is at, because the palace is not overrun and overtaken, even though there were dark friends there that were able to kill, some of the kinswomen that were there, and thus they weren't powerful enough to be able to send word to Elaine, because they could no longer travel. They couldn't make a gateway large enough to actually send anybody to get Elaine or warn of anything going on. So Dark Friends being in the palace is not fun thing, but anyway, Talmanes and co, they managed to make it to that traveling ground. They're able to get some of that information. She's like, yeah, we weren't able to get Elaine because there's only the one kinswoman left. That's a problem. But then they go to make their way to Aludra and the dragons, and they manage to make it to those storehouses where the dragons are. They decide eventually that they need to just make a final stand, that they're all going to end up dying here in the first place, so they basically decide that maybe we should just use charges large enough to just destroy these weapons so that the Dark One can't use them, or something like that. But Talmanes, despite, being in skirmishes with a couple of Fades at this point, he's gotten a couple of scratches from the Fades' blades, which contains some peculiar type of poison, which affects him rather drastically, we shall say. Talmanes, despite being in delirium basically as a result of these encounters, does think at the very last seconds, like, no, actually aim all of the cannons at Caemlyn's walls here so that we can escape out the walls. Like, we have the firepower to just knock down the wall here, so let's just do that and escape and we will live. And so they do that. And that is all well and good. That is what happens in the prologue. Otherwise, back in the fields of Merrilor, we do have basically all of the other major storylines have been collected over here. You have Rand here, you have Nynaeve here, you have many other people here. Aviendha has returned here as well. We find in this point Perrin's here, Egwene's here, Elaine's here, like everybody's here basically. Everybody except for Mat is here. And we'll talk slightly more about Mat a little bit later, but for now, some of the first scenes that we get in the fields of Merrilor, I believe one of these scenes actually might occur in the prologue. I think, like, we get a POV from Egianan, or now named Lylewyn, and Bael Domon. So we get them, and I believe, like I said, this scene might technically be in the prologue, but it is back in the fields of Merrilor in either case. They are now here because Lylewyn is, like, sort of betraying the Seanchan at this point. She doesn't really have any role there. She's been stripped of her title and her name by Tuon, for example, and she also knows the connection that the Seanchan have to channeling, that any woman who is able to control a channeler through an Adam is somebody who is capable of learning how to channel, and she wants to use this basically against the Seanchan to try to bring down some of their advantages, to try to weaken them as some manner of force, and also try to I guess, maybe act as some sort of intermediary to try to make things go less not smooth, if that makes sense, so that things aren't as messy as they otherwise would be between the Shan-Chan and everybody else. Not 100% certain of Egyanen's, like, what her actual goals are at this point, but she does intend to, try to meet with Egwene and Nynaeve, for example, to figure out some way to address this issue with the Shan-Chan to, maybe even topple the Empire as a result of this. Like I said, I'm not 100% sure on her motivations, why she's actually doing this, but she is in the fields of Merrilor now. She is searching for Nynaeve. She is taken to Nynaeve, where Nynaeve, confronts her about the fact that Egyanen was the person tasked with throwing away the male Adam that Semirhage ended up using against Rand, and so there's a little bit of discussion about that, but ultimately they are taken to Egwene. And nothing really happens at this point. There's, a couple more scenes that occur over various chapters. One of them is from Egwene, which we'll talk about in just a second, where Egwene does notice Lyle-Wyn and Bale and has them sent away so that she can deal with them later. So nothing's quite happened on this front yet. That'll probably happen, if I were to guess, within next week's reading. So that's what's going on with the Shan-Chan here in the fields of Merrilor. Otherwise, as I said before, Aviendha has also returned here, and she's talking to the Wise Ones of her visions in Ruidian. So, there are some big questions to be asked about what the purpose of the Aiel is going to be following the last battle, since their purpose, as of recent, is largely been preparing for the last battle, and of course the concerns that Aviendha has about the future of the Aiel based off of her visions when she went through the ter'angreal the second time. So Aviendha's talking with the Wise Ones about this, and they're kind of concerned for obvious reasons about what's actually going on there. Bear, one of the Wise Ones, ultimately decides that she's going to go and test it. She can't channel, so she's not going to be much use in the battle, so she has Nynaeve make a gateway for her to go to Ruidin so that she can, go through the pillars again, basically, and see if she experiences that, if she experiences something different, if it's like the same vision as Nynaeve had, or if it's a vision of her own descendants or whatever. That's just a little bit of speculation going on my part, but Bear is going to go test that out. So that's something that I'm sure will come back around later within the book. Aviendha goes to Rand, but first stopping to ask Elaine for permission. There is a scene of that. If you know what happens with regard to any of that, it's because of the First Sisters thing, and Aviendha wanting to, consummate her relationship with Rand. All of that does eventually happen within the week's reading. All of that's fun stuff. I don't need to get into the details of all of that. Although I will mention that after that does happen, when Aviendha and Rand have had their interactions within the week's reading, Rand goes to sleep and ends up in another dream shard for Moradin, so he ends up interacting with Moradin as well, and he manages to take control of that, basically spooks Moradin out of his own dream shard, which is really cool. He threatens the Dark One in the process, just like, hey, I'm coming for you directly, so go tell your master that, have fun, loser. So that was actually a really entertaining scene. Like I said, that happens after Aviendha goes to Rand, all of that stuff. Fun, mostly just fun scenes, right? Like, not all of it necessarily fits as, like, smoothly, makes as much, I feel like these characters are the characters that I've known for all of these books sense. I think that Sanderson, as these 3 books have gone along, has slightly parted from some of these characters in an easily recognizable way over time. Not anything super concerning, but it was the Aviendha and Rand interactions that I think most strayed from that for me, at least in this book so far, where it's just like, I'm not 100% sure I believe that these scenes would have happened in this way and this smoothly given the timing of everything, but sure, I'll just go along with it, whatever, it doesn't really matter, it's fine. Some other things that happen in the field of Merrilor include Egwene considering how to approach Rand about the breaking of the seals, since that's something that Rand plans to do and something that he plans to address in the meeting with all of the leaders, and we'll talk about that going on. That's the reason everybody's gathered in the fields of Merrilor, is so that Rand can address them all together, because he has some things to go over with them. So Egwene is basically just trying to tackle these ideas, like, Rand wants to break the seals, I don't know that that should happen. But what's interesting about these scenes, actually, something that I found really notable about them, is that Egwene's consideration and some of her interactions she has with some other characters with regard to the breaking of the seals suggests that she might not actually believe that Rand is wrong about the breaking of the seals. At least she basically says this at one point, is like, I'm not 100% sure that the seals need to not be broken, but I don't think that they need to be broken as soon or as quickly as Rand wants to do them, because she's been looking through prophecies and other stuff that the White Tower has, and it's just like, if the seals need to be broken, I think they need to be broken later. There's probably a different timing for when this kind of thing should occur. So she wants to address this with Rand. She's writing a letter to him that she's not sure she'll send, but she's writing a letter to him basically to try to process her thoughts on that, how to try to tackle that idea with him. While she's doing all of this, while she's having this discussion and this combat in her head about it, official word does come about Caemlyn having been attacked, of course. There's also the scene that is literally Gaibon and Talmanes and Aludra and everybody arriving in Merrilor themselves, having managed to... I believe what happens is Elaine is woken up at one point in time and alerted that, you know, nobody was checking in from Caemlyn the way that they were supposed to. The kinswomen weren't, so she had people go and check to see what was wrong, and so these people that were going to check to see what was wrong were probably able to bring Talmanes and everybody to the fields of Merrilor. That's basically the implicit what happened off the page that allowed for this to occur. So all these people managed to get into Merrilor. A lot of these people are injured, of course, so a bunch of Aes Sedai and other people are set to task in Merrilor to heal the refugees from Caemlyn, since there's a bunch of refugees coming from Caemlyn. Aludra and the dragons and everything, they're here now. Like I said, Talmanes is healed by Nynaeve. This is the scene where Egwene has Lywin and Bael sent away so that she can deal with them later. So we're getting not just the Field of Merrilor stuff, but also the fact that Caemlyn is attacked, and this is directly interfering with what's happening in the fields. So that's important. There are also scenes over the course of these handful of chapters between Rand and Perrin that see them discussing topics such as madness and the taint. So Rand has a little bit of interesting introspection, I would say, with regard to the fact that Lews Therin Telemon failing to lock up the Dark One properly, the breaking of the world, the tainting of Sidon in the first place, all of these things were as a result of Lews Therin's failure in the age previous, but Rand's madness and encountering Lews Therin in his own head and having to come to terms with that is a lot of why he has Lews Therin's memories and stuff like that, and having those memories and that knowledge is a lot of what's allowing him to actually know basically how he needs to tackle the last battle this time. So they kind of discuss the irony of that, the fact that the breaking of the world was obviously a bad thing, the tainting of Sidon, not a good thing, of course, but all of those things also technically allowed for Rand to be in a position where he now knows what to do this time. So that's an interesting idea. I like that thematic concept, for example. So Rand and Perrin are talking about things like this. They're talking about the two rivers. They learn about Caemlyn's fall as well. Rand mentions at one point believing that Demandred probably has a hand in the fall of Caemlyn, so that's something that he's concerned about. He knows, obviously, or is able to put together pretty intuitively, that the Trollocs were able to get there via the Waygate, even though he thought that it was safe, so he wonders about obviously the mechanics of that. He commits to having Asha'man sent to help with refugees and penning in the Trollocs in the city until a better plan with regards to Caemlyn is brought forth, basically. So there's all of that. Rand learns of Elaine's pregnancy. He's also considering the factor of power-wrought weapons in the war now, because he's considering that Perrin's hammer that he has now is a power-wrought weapon. Of course, there are Asha'man and other people helping with getting like the Aiel new spearheads that are power wrought so that they can have a little bit of an edge in the battle to come, of course. So there's a lot of like little details of characters learning different things. There's the whole Caemlyn thing that is coming into the fields of Merrilor. Just a lot of stuff, like I said, like consolidating, centralizing itself here, which is all really cool. But before we continue on here, before we get on to the actual meeting that occurs the next day, let's briefly jump over tracks to the Black Tower. and talk about the Black Tower, because I want to talk about the Black Tower right now. I just gotta say it, and I'm not the first person who has said this. I know because I have a couple friends who agree with me and told me that there was going to be a character that was basically Sanderson's creation, that was like one of the best characters slash storylines of the series, particularly the late part of the series that Sanderson wrote, of course, because it was his creation, and that is Androl. And I have to say, I agree. As far as Towers of Midnight and A Memory of Light are concerned so far, I've really, really liked the Black Tower stuff. The fact that the Black Tower is actually mattering again, the fact that it is being utilized in a way that works for the tensions and the scope of the series, despite Taim no longer being Demandred, is really working for me. There's a lot of things about the Black Tower that is clicking, but there's also character stuff about the Black Tower that is working, because there are many scenes over these opening chapters with regard to Androl and Pavara, who, of course, at the end of Towers of Midnight, Androl basically went to go meet with Pavara. It's just like, hey, I know that you want to get out of the Black Tower. Me and some other Logain's followers would also like to get out of the Black Tower. We should probably try to find some way to actually deal with this. And so the early portion of this book is actually dealing with that to some degree, and I've been really enjoying that. So with regard to the Black Tower, you have, honestly, it's not like a whole ton that's going on, but you feature Androl and Pavara and some of the others, discussing whether they could escape the Black Tower. They're trying to weigh their options. Some of those options are like, we could escape the Black Tower if it was storming or something like that. We might be able to escape, but might not be able to escape. But ultimately, they do determine that in order to deal with the White or with the Black Tower properly, they should probably try to gain control of it somehow. And they know that the only way to do that is in order to find Logain. So now they're trying to get information with regard to Logain's where he's actually at, what's going on with him. It is purported over the course of various different scenes that he is going to be returning to the tower very soon. It's also reported by some people that he has actually apologized or made amends with Taim about, the division that has occurred in the Black Tower as a result of Logain being more directly serving Rand as the Dragon Reborn, of course, and Taim very obviously not being in support of Rand as the Dragon Reborn. So there's a lot of question marks about this, especially because we know that there are a bunch of characters, both of the Aes Sedai and especially of the Asha'man, that are being turned. And at first I thought that this whole turning concept was like some form of compulsion, but it seems like turning is its own very specific thing of 13 channelers and 13 Myrddraal that are required to link together to turn somebody who is of the light into somebody of the Dark One, basically, a Dark Friend, forcing them to be a Dark Friend, and then, a psychological turning of the screw, and they're just turned to the other side. Of course, Androl and the others encounter this a lot while they're in the Black Tower, because a lot of their friends who support Logain end up coming back at one point in time very different people. They're the same voice, it's the same person, but you look into their eyes and the way they talk, and obviously who they tend to support and stuff like that, and things are different. There's something off about them, and you can very much tell. If you know the person well enough, you can tell whether they have actually been turned to the Dark One or not. And so this is happening. Because this is happening, that is what they assume is either happened or is going to happen with Logain. So now they know that, hey, we need to find Logain in order to do literally anything about what's going on in the Black Tower here, because we can't use the power in order to make gateways to escape, and escaping while there's all these towers with turned Asha'man around who are in support of Taim is basically not an option. So we need to find something to do. So that's the task that they're dealing with in the Black Tower, and we get to explore a little bit of that. More of Logain's faithful are turned over the course of time. Others are now starting to notice a little bit, because there's one particular of Logain's faithful who is turned where it's very obvious that he's turned, because he was in very heavy support of Logain, but now suddenly is not in support of Logain at all. And people are like, this doesn't seem like how he was literally 5.5 seconds ago, basically. What's going on? We should figure out what's going on, because whatever Taim's doing, he's doing something, and it is actually suspicious now. Matched with some of these scenes, we also feature Andril being demoted. So the factor of Asha'man, who are like, this was also a point that I believe was talked about at a couple points in Towers of Midnight. It might have been in this book, but I think it was Towers of Midnight, where there were Asha'man who were like, kind of struggling to be raised within the Black Tower, but then would be turned and obviously appear to be somewhat different people, and then would very shockingly be raised up to the level of full Asha'man like incredibly quickly, including people who otherwise didn't seem like they should be ready for that. That was part of one of the things I was suspicious to Andril in the first place. There's a lot going on, but Andril, as being a very obviously not in direct support of Taim, is demoted by Taim, kind of indirectly here. It's somebody else who tells him that, but he basically gathers all of his allies during these scenes that they're like, they need to make these moves imminently. If they're going to do anything with regard to Logain or whatever, they need to move now. And what their move is to set up a trap so that one of their allies, who is some minor noble of Tyr, it seems like, he's going to pretend to be a High Lord in order to like implicitly eke out information from one of Taim's faithful, set up a trap so that they can learn where Logain is being kept. They're able to do that, actually. The scene is rather effective. They are able to learn that Logain is being kept in the tower, the Black Tower foundation, so basically in the ground. And they set up a rescue attempt. They go and try to actually deal with this fact. They go successfully to Logain. They get to him successfully and are able to free him nearly successfully, except apparently one of Taim's men was able to question one of the allies who was left behind, and are therefore able to stop the rescue midway. We also learn over the course of time that Taim has like a quota of some of these channelers that he needs to have turned to the Dark One, and he's not in the best straits with the Dark One, presumably because he hasn't turned enough people yet. So even that's why like Logain's followers specifically, for example, are being turned. That's why Logain, they're trying to turn Logain, but because he has such a strong will, it's like something that's going to take a while for them to be able to do. Like there's a lot of stuff going on in the Black Tower that is really interesting. I think it's been my favorite part of this book so far has been Andril and Pavara. That's something that I should also address really quickly here. There is a scene, particularly in this portion of the book, where Andril and Pavara wind up bonding each other after a mishap with regard to linking, because, Pavara is a little bit confused why everybody follows Andril when Andril insists that he doesn't have very much strength in the power at all. He's maybe the weakest person in the Black Tower, period. And like the only good that he is being able to travel. He's known as the page boy to other people because he has a talent in being able to travel and make gateways, except that he can't do that now because the power doesn't allow them to do that, probably because of Terangri all around. But anyway, there is a linking mishap where Pavara tries to let Andril use some of her power to learn like what linking is like, but it goes a little bit poorly. She overreacts and ends up bonding him without his permission. Then he bonds her in return without her permission. So that was kind of an entertaining scene. But really what it comes down to is that these two characters have now bonded each other. They are each other's warders, but they are also, channelers both in and of themselves. And there's an interesting now like telepathic connection between them. And I'm not sure if this is something special that's happened between these two specifically, or if this is something that just naturally happens when a male and female channeler bond each other. As far as I know, I don't know if there's any other cases in the series up to this point where characters have bonded each other. So I'm very curious to know if like that is actually the mechanic, like if two channelers bond each other. Maybe it's a male-female specific thing, but if two channelers were to bond each other just in general, would that make up this telepathic thing that's going on between them now? So that's also another interesting dynamic that I found really enjoyable to read. So yeah, that's basically what's going on in the Black Tower. Back at the fields of Merrilor the next day, Rand begins the meeting with all of the world's rulers that next morning, and amongst all these people are the nobles, the the monarchs, I suppose, of the Borderlands. You obviously have Egwene here, Elaine's here, the King of Mirandy arrives, and notably when the King of Mirandy arrives, Rand goes up and like looks at him the way that he is able to like recognize Forsaken. He's able to like look at them and basically know from memory through Luz Theron and whatnot whether somebody is one of the Forsaken or not, and if he knows which one it is, he determines that the King of Mirandy is not Demandred, or at least this is very much implicitly implied. It's like Rand goes up and inspects this guy. It's just like, where is he? I thought that that would be him or something like that. And obviously, it seems pretty obvious that Rand is also trying to determine who in the world, literally who in the world is Demandred, and what secret force is he gathering, because Demandred's doing something. Rand still doesn't know. The King of Mirandy is clearly not him. But anyway, the King of Mirandy is also part of this meeting. The Aiel are part of this meeting. The Sea Folk are technically part of this meeting. The Aes Sedai, of course, even beyond Egwene. So, like, there's a lot of people meeting now about what Rand is planning to do with regard to the Black, or not with regard to the Black Tower, with regard to the last battle, rather. And he basically sets forth his requirements for making sure that he does his job. He's like, if I'm going to give up my life for this cause, there must be peace. And I have 3 requirements in order for peace to occur in this world. One of those is that borders between all nations will be unchanged after this. You're not going to just needlessly cause war with one another just to change your landmass or whatever. The seals of the Dark One's prison will be broken over the course of the battle, because I plan to do that so that I can actually kill the Dark One, because Rand reveals to Egwene here that he also straight up wants to kill the Dark One if he can, not just make a new prison, not just reseal the prison. He wants to try to kill the Dark One, and if that doesn't work, then basically reseal the prison with new seals, is more or less essentially how Rand's plan is. And the third requirement is that Rand will have control over all of the armies of literally everybody in the battle. And this obviously causes a little bit of uproar, and Rand is just like, yeah, this was worthless. I probably shouldn't have even had this meeting. He's about to leave the pavilion where all of these nobles and kings and other leaders and whatnot are gathered, and womp womp, Moiraine shows up. Moiraine is here now. Mat is not, notably. Mat is somewhere else, and I believe Perrin has some sort of vision when thinking of Mat that he's probably heading somewhere in a Shan-Chan region, so it might be that he's heading over towards like Abu Dar to maybe do something with Tuon, maybe try to... I anticipate that Mat's storyline in this book is probably going to be somewhat along the lines of being a negotiator between Rand and obviously all the forces of the light and the Shan-Chan. More on that topic a little bit later, but Mat is not here, but Moiraine is here now. So Moiraine was able to manage to get back here. Oz literally everybody, because everybody thought she was dead. Very many of these leaders also knew who she was, so she shocks everybody who is in the pavilion and is able to basically convince them through like recounting some prophecy and stuff like, hey, we should be supporting Rand, because without Rand nothing happens. Like, nothing good happens, obviously. Like, Rand is the only person here who is 100% required in order to beat the Dark One, in order to save the day, so you should do what he wants, basically. He does manage to agree to some terms to add provisions and adjustments to his own goals. However, Moiraine is able to be a form of mediator in between Rand and some of the others, and some of the others are able to discuss with it amongst themselves, like, yeah, we will support Rand if you make some of these provisions. For example, if borders can't change, but like, what if there are criminals or whatnot that come between and do stuff? And what if that causes disputes? Or what if somebody does have a dispute? What if somebody does try to do something? Who's going to mediate all of that in the aftermath of you when you're dead? Because Rand is like 90% sure he'll die in the last battle, or he implies that anyway. But in either case, there are questions. So what it comes down to is that there are now, that agreement basically stands. The borders will remain unchanged. But in the case of disputes and criminal charges and other stuff like that, now the Aiel will be mediators in those cases. The seals will still be broken, but Rand no longer holds the seals. Moiraine was able to basically convince him to give the seals to Egwene, and Egwene seemingly reluctantly takes the seals. But like I said earlier, there were some scenes earlier in the fields where before Egwene was considering about the seals. Like, if they need to be broken, they probably need to not be broken when Rand wants to break them. So the fact that they are now in Egwene's possession is probably a good thing with regards to this. She just needs to figure out when they're supposed to be dealt with. And that's what Moiraine is able to convince Rand of. It's just like, okay, Egwene can break them instead of you. Like, just let her have them because she's the Amyrlin, she's the keeper of the seals, like, let her deal with this and she will know. And Rand's like, okay, fine. And Egwene is also like, okay, fine. But I think in her head, she's probably secretly liking this decision. In either case, like I said, Egwene now has hold of the seals, and Rand's other provision of, or requirement of, Rand commanding all the armies is now like, there's going to be somebody who commands all the armies in place of Rand, and in order for everybody to sign, because everybody starts signing this agreement at this point, Elaine will be the lead commander of all of the armies instead of Rand directly, and that is enough for everybody to sign it. And that is basically the provision. There is one other provision, however, that is added to this agreement, and that is that the entire agreement is void if the Shan-Chan also do not sign and agree onto it, because everybody is worried about the Shan-Chan. The Shan-Chan aren't going to respect everybody else's borders and stuff like that if they don't agree to this. So Rand is like, okay, well, if the entire agreement is void, if the Shan-Chan don't sign it, everybody signs it. Now Rand basically plans to go to petition the Shan-Chan to sign this agreement and try to deal with them in some way. Like I said, I think that Mat will probably be an important mediary tactic with regard to the Shan-Chan. So that's my guess of where that's going to be immediately going with Rand's storyline. Like I said, Perrin pretty sure has a vision or one of those flashes of images of Mat in his head that suggests that he is like going the way of the Shan-Chan at this point. So that is probably something that we'll see interesting happen there. I'm looking forward to the continuation of that, but I'm also looking forward to the continuation of just the battle in general, because immediately after this agreement is dealt with, we now have to actually tackle the battles. Of course, Caemlyn is in, desperate need of help, and Kandor is also basically lost at this point, and apparently Tarwin's Gap has already been dealing with battle. That is some other scenes that we get over the course of the reading, is that Lan and all of the Malkieri are holding off the Trollocs at Tarwin's Gap. So there are meetings that are dealt with between like Elaine and the four great captains, so people like Gareth Brine and Lord of Toralde, some of these other people, Davram Bashir, of course. So they're like a meeting between some of these people about like, okay, what are the fronts of battle? What do we need to deal with immediately? What are we doing here? And it is determined that there are going to be like 4 major fronts of battle in the last battle. That'll be Tarwin's Gap, first of all. Second of all will be Kandor, basically, for this moment, because Kandor has already basically fallen, but of course Trollocs being able to just have free reign of the world through that area would not be a good thing. The third front is Caemlyn, and then the fourth front is, of course, in the Blight itself, basically at the Dark One's prison at Sheol Gul. That seems to be basically what's going on. So it is agreed that these are going to be the fronts of battle, and that they're going to focus on things in certain ways in order to give themselves the best advantage. Of course, freeing up Caemlyn a little bit will be the easiest task of these 4 at the moment, so that is going to be the primary focus right now, is going and getting the Trollocs out of Caemlyn, dealing with them, retaking that area basically, and being able to control that waygate so that Trollocs aren't again able to just be allowed into this relatively southern portion of the world through Caemlyn. That would be not good, so they need to regain control of that. And Davram Bashir will help Elaine defeat the Trollocs in Caemlyn to deal with that, to make sure that that waygate is held off. Elaine will primarily operate out of the fields of Merrilor for now, being the central commander of those 4 groups, basically. But, that is the first task, is basically have the bulk of forces go and retake Caemlyn and deal with that problem. In the meantime, ATTRIBUTION is going to go and command a particular army that will go with Rand to Sheol Gul. Of course, the Aiel are also determined that they will go with them. That was one of the other provisions that was added to the agreement, was that the Aiel were left out of the agreement entire. Rand thought that he was respecting them by doing that, but it is instead determined that the Aiel need a purpose. They need something to do. They've been training for the last battle basically this entire time, so they're also part of the agreement. Like I said, they were included in the agreement to be like mediators in case of dispute and stuff, but they're also going to be part of the battle and stuff, and that includes being commanded by Elaine. So they're going to go with the army with Iturralde over to Sheol Ghul. That's where Rand basically plans to do his part of the assault. So they're going to go that direction and basically prepare for that battlefront. Gareth Bryne is going to go with the Aes Sedai because, of course, Gareth Bryne is now bonded by Swan Sanche, so that's fun. But Gareth Bryne also doesn't want to be involved with Caemlyn directly. It seems like this is something that Elaine's internally processing and implicitly getting out of him. But either way, Gareth Bryne is going to go with the Aes Sedai to take command of just holding off the forces at Kandor. It is agreed upon by everybody, including all the Borderlanders, that Kandor as a nation is lost. They can't do anything about it now, but what they can do is keep Trollocs from overrunning the world through it. So that's what the Aes Sedai are going to do. And finally, let's see, there's also going to be part of their armies that are also sent over to Tarwin's Gap to help Lan hold off that front as well, like I said. So basically the goal at this point is deal with Caemlyn, take back control of that, and then we can focus larger armies on Tarwin's Gap, for example, and hold off the armies better there, try to make better headway there. And of course, everything going on in Sheol Ghul will be a lot of fun. That'll need to be a big focus, but they need to deal with some of these other fronts that are already actively ongoing wars first. So there's all of that. The very last chapter that I read, chapter 8, had a little bit of Elaine and some of the other group beginning their attack on Caemlyn, basically to try to draw out the Trollocs so that they can be slaughtered there. And a particular note is that she has, amongst her commanders and stuff like that, word is passed around that she is carrying Rand's children, whereas previously this is something that's been hidden for the last several books. It is now revealed rather explicitly and publicly at this point that Elaine carries Rand's children, and so that's basically a morale boost for all of her people and everybody supporting this war because they're all battling under the Dragon Reborn, under Rand al'Thor here. Elaine is the commander of all of the armies underneath him, basically, and she also carries Rand's children, so there's this dynamic of, hey, the Queen is a very important person. We need the Dragon Reborn. She is obviously in very good graces with the Dragon Reborn. Cool, let's just go do this thing for her, right? So, yeah, that is basically how my reading for the week ended. And this video still wound up being an hour long, but honestly, it probably could have ended up being way longer than that if I spent literally any more time than I did on some of these scenes. I still ended up doing a lot of plot summary, but I felt like I was able to give a little bit more of my commentary. I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens with regard to all of these storylines. I do think that over the next couple of diaries, there's going to be a little bit more active splitting between what's going on and where with the storylines. Obviously, the multiple fronts of battle is going to be something that I'll have to be taking into consideration. That'll probably get really complicated, grouping things together so that I can talk about them in future diaries just on account of how often POVs switch and stuff. I don't know if we're going to start seeing Matt's role in the story within this week's reading yet or not. I would like to. We'll see. But yeah, I'm really into the book so far after just the 22%, and I cannot wait to continue. So that is going to be the end of this diary, this first one with regard to the prologue of the first 8 chapters, the first fifth of the book. Next week, I will be covering chapters 9 through 22. That'll be the next 200 pages of the book, and will get me, not quite halfway through, of course, but it'll get me pretty close to halfway through. So that is where I plan to be through by the next diary next week. So at the time of this video releasing will probably be when I'm actually starting to work on that. I'm hoping to spend just a few days with all of that time, with all those pages like I was able to with this week's reading, so that I can continue to get ahead, because I have a business trip that I'm taking next weekend, some other time-related stuff with a new job that I'm starting next week, so I'm going to try to get through next week's reading here over the next couple of days so that I can get that done ahead of time and then see what happens after that. So yeah, I hope to see you guys next week with the second diary for A Memory of Light. Like I said, I'm really into it so far, can't wait to continue, and I hope that you guys are excited too, because yeah, I'm nearly done. So, yeah, that'll be the end of this video. Sorry for rambling a good bit. I hope that that was relatively efficient. I think this video could have been a lot longer than it was, even though it is quite lengthy already. I apologize for that, but I'll get out of your hair now and hope that any of the next few videos could be shorter than this. Doubtful at this point. I don't think I'm capable of making a sub, like 1 hour, basically, a notably sub 1 hour Wheel of Time diary anymore. But in either case, for now, I've been your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.